The smell was the first thing neighbors noticed, though no one could place it at the time. In a crowded district of Chongqing in the late 1990s, residents lived close enough to hear each other's televisions through the walls and smell cooking from the hallways. When the odor began drifting from one particular apartment, it blended into the city's usual mix of damp concrete and street food. No one immediately imagined it marked the work of a serial killer operating quietly inside the building. The man at the center of the case was He Tianrong. To those who knew him casually, he was quiet, unremarkable, and largely unnoticed. He did not display obvious volatility in public. He moved through markets and stairwells without drawing attention, another face in a city of millions. That anonymity became his shield. In a dense urban environment, isolation can exist behind a single closed door. His victims were vulnerable women, many working in nightlife districts where economic hardship and limited protection left them exposed. He approached them with conversation and promises of money, presenting himself as a client or acquaintance. Witness accounts later reconstructed how he guided them back to his apartment under the cover of normal interaction. There were no public confrontations, no dramatic scenes. The danger began only once the door closed. Inside the apartment, prosecutors later described a repeated pattern of homicide, followed by calculated efforts to eliminate evidence. He dismembered bodies into small fragments, believing that reducing remains into unrecognizable pieces would prevent identification and delay investigation. Authorities stated that portions were discarded in garbage systems, drainage pipes, and waste channels throughout the city. Some remains entered sewer systems, surfacing only when blockages forced sanitation crews to investigate. At first, the discoveries appeared disconnected. Maintenance workers reported unusual obstructions. Trash collectors encountered suspicious materials. Each find triggered police involvement, but the fragments were incomplete and often difficult to trace. Forensic teams began documenting each recovery, photographing and cataloging evidence piece by piece. What initially seemed random began to form a disturbing pattern. Families of missing women filed reports describing daughters who had left for work and never returned. Their last known movements often traced back to entertainment areas. Investigators compared timelines, locations, and witness statements. The pattern sharpened slowly. The disappearances were not isolated. They clustered around specific dates and areas. When forensic analysis confirmed that multiple remains belonged to different women, the possibility of a serial offender became unavoidable. Suspicion narrowed toward He Tianrong through witness accounts and circumstantial links. Several people recalled seeing him in the company of missing women. Surveillance infrastructure at the time was limited, so investigators relied heavily on interviews and physical evidence. A search of his apartment revealed tools consistent with cutting and concealment. Despite cleaning efforts, traces of blood remained embedded in flooring and plumbing. Laboratory testing confirmed the presence of human blood, matching profiles from recovered remains. During interrogation, he initially denied involvement. Investigators confronted him with forensic findings, witness placements, and inconsistencies in his timeline. Over hours of questioning, the gaps closed. According to court documents and state media reports, he eventually admitted to killing multiple women over a sustained period. His statements described an approach focused on practicality and concealment rather than visible rage. Officers later stated that his tone was flat, almost mechanical, as he explained how he believed fragmentation would prevent identification. Authorities further reported that he consumed portions of human flesh, a revelation that intensified national shock and public anger. The case moved rapidly to trial. Prosecutors presented forensic links between his residence and the scattered remains, witness testimony placing victims in his presence, and his own admissions. The fragmentation of evidence did not weaken the case. Instead, it demonstrated the deliberate effort to obstruct identification. experts testified about reconstruction methods used to match remains to missing persons reports, a painstaking process that relied on bone analysis, DNA comparison, and cross-referencing timelines. Each reconstructed profile returned a name to what had been reduced to fragments. Public reaction across Chongqing was immediate and severe. Media coverage labeled him the corpse-grinding killer, a phrase reflecting both the brutality of the acts and the method of disposal. Fear spread through nightlife districts, families warned daughters and sisters to avoid unfamiliar clients, apartment residents reevaluated their sense of safety, realizing that prolonged violence had occurred in close proximity without detection. Community meetings were held to discuss personal security and reporting suspicious behavior. The sense of violation was not confined to the victims' families. It extended to an entire district that had unknowingly housed the crimes. In court, the weight of the evidence left little room for defense. Judges outlined the number of victims, the sustained pattern of violence, and the calculated concealment of bodies. The sentence was decisive. He Tianrong was convicted of multiple counts of intentional homicide and given the death penalty. State media later reported that he was executed in 2000. For the families of the victims, the sentence delivered legal closure, but not emotional restoration. Some remains were never fully recovered, complicating burial rites and leaving lingering uncertainty that could never be fully resolved. Investigators later described the case as one of the most disturbing in Chongqing's criminal history. It highlighted how fragmented evidence can obscure a serial pattern and how infrastructure systems, trash collection, drainage networks, sewage maintenance, can inadvertently become repositories of concealed crime. It also reinforced the importance of coordination between sanitation workers and law enforcement, as early discoveries had not immediately been connected into a single investigative thread. Behind the sensational headlines lay a colder truth. Vulnerable women were targeted, isolated, and killed by a man who believed anonymity and dismemberment would protect him. The concealment methods were methodical, designed to scatter physical evidence across an entire city. He depended on delay. He depended on fragmentation. But forensic persistence eventually overcame dispersion. What he attempted to erase was reconstructed through patient documentation and cross-agency cooperation. The case left a lasting imprint on local policing practices. Missing persons reports began receiving closer cross-agency scrutiny. Patterns of discovery in waste systems were no longer treated as isolated curiosities. The crimes demonstrated that even when evidence is broken apart and scattered, it can be reconstructed through patience and coordination, and that anonymity in a crowded city does not guarantee invisibility. In the end, what defined the Chongqing case was not only the cruelty of the acts, but the attempt to erase identity itself. Victims were reduced to fragments in an effort to strip them of recognition. Yet identification came, piece by piece. Families pressed for answers. Investigators refused to dismiss scattered remains as accidents of infrastructure. The trail, though intentionally obscured, led back to one apartment and one man. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.